Hi there. Before we get into today's episode, I would like to read a quote from Caitlyn Jenner's memoir, The Secrets of My Life. Quote, "Transgender guidelines suggest that I no longer be referred to as Bruce in any circumstance. Here are my guidelines. I will refer to the name Bruce when I think it appropriate, and the name Caitlyn when I think it appropriate." Right after I transitioned, Meredith Ramirez wrote on Fusion.net that Bruce was a so-called dead name and should never be used again. Bruce was not a lie. Bruce existed. Bruce won the Olympics. I lived as a man before I transitioned. I had a life as Bruce, and the more comfortable I become as Caitlyn, the more I actually embrace Bruce as a valuable part of my life. You can't simply blot out your past, your beliefs, your interests. I am not going to bury the name Bruce. The life that you lived as a father and dad and husband, the accomplishments and failures, do not get sent to the trash with the click of the mouse. At least for me, there has to be some reality here. Bruce existed for 65 years. That's the reality. The narration in today's episode will mimic the way Caitlyn writes about herself and life story in her book. In her memoir, she details the lives of Bruce and Caitlyn as two separate entities. When referring to herself pre-transition, she uses Bruce and he/him pronouns. When referring to herself post-transition, she uses Caitlyn and she/her pronouns. Please keep that in mind when watching the video. Thank you.
So, I read Caitlyn's book.
Stop.
Yeah.
You say she was controlling. You say that you played into her. She was the boss.
Why does everything have to be that Kris is such a bitch and an ass?
Well, you blame her for your estrangement and abandonment of your kids.
She's so angry at mom, like for no reason. It was like, I didn't speak to my sister because of Kris. I didn't see my kids because of Kris. She said, I didn't see a dime of my money. She was insinuating that like mom took the check and pocketed it.
And then all through the book, Kris knew. Kris knew before I even made love to her.
Why does she talk about it? Don't bring it up.
What do you think I said to you about Vanity Fair? You say something nice or don't say anything at all.
Nothing was said that was terrible in that Vanity Fair.
All you said was negative. So now you know how I feel.
Kris Jenner and Caitlyn Jenner have a history that spans decades. The exes wed in 1991 and had a very tumultuous divorce decades later. They starred in the hit reality show Keeping Up with the Kardashians, which documented their blended family. Kris has 4 children from her previous marriage, Kourtney, Kim, Khloe, and Rob, while Caitlyn has 4 from hers, Bert, Cassandra, Brandon, and Brody. Together, Kris and Caitlyn have 2 daughters, Kendall and Kylie Jenner. The Kardashian-Jenner brood is referred to as America's billionaire royal family. They have amassed wealth, fame, and power. But all that glitters isn't gold. In addition to the success, they've also had their fair share of lawsuits, scandals, and controversies. In this video, we will take a look at the feud between Kris and Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner, formerly known as Olympic gold medalist Bruce Jenner, went through a very public transformation in 2014 when she transitioned from a man to a woman. After coming out as a trans woman, Caitlyn made public statements that put Kris and the Kardashian clan in a bad light. When they announced their separation back in 2013, rumors regarding the nature of their split made headlines. In 2014, Kris filed for divorce, and their divorce was finalized the following year. Upon her transition, Caitlyn told news media outlets that Kris knew about her gender issues prior to marriage. Caitlyn's public statements would cause the exes to have an all-out war that played out in the media and on the show, leaving the public to wonder who was telling the truth. Prior to Kris Jenner, Caitlyn was married twice before. In her book, she writes about her previous marriages and how her gender issues came into play. She begins with her first wife, Christy. Quote, "Her maiden name was Crownover. We met at the end of freshman year at Graceland College in Iowa. She was the daughter of a minister and, like me, lived a sheltered and cloistered life. She was not aware of my gender issues when we started dating sophomore year, and I wasn't about to tell her. Not then. Christy and Bruce dated through college and wed in December of 1972. She was a flight attendant for United Airlines. They had an agreeable marriage and lived a modest life. Christy was very motherly and nurturing to Bruce. She took care of everything, including him. While he had his sights set for the 1976 Olympics, she worked and supported him. Quote, Christy was smart and assertive, the first in what would become a trend of wives who were also the same. They took care of me, did everything for me, and I let them do everything for me. Not simply because it made my life easier, but because of my own internal weakness that only got worse over time.
What I try to accomplish in the book is, it is my story. This is not what you call a self-help book where I say, do this, this, and this to get better. This is a story of my journey. It was a long struggle about my stuff that's down in my soul. And in being honest and telling that and coming out the other end, a free spirit and a better person.
Growing up, Bruce was a very shy, socially awkward kid. He didn't fit in and often kept to himself. He wasn't a bright student and had to repeat second grade twice as he struggled with dyslexia. But those weren't the only things Bruce struggled with. At an early age, he felt at odds with his own body and was very curious about the opposite sex. Quote, I was about 10. I was too young to even remotely figure out why I was so fascinated by my mother's bedroom closet. I looked at the dresses and the shirts and the shoes. I brushed my hand over them so I could feel the cloth and cotton. I glanced around to make sure I was alone. I picked up a dress and put it on. Young Bruce couldn't articulate what he was feeling at the time, but he knew that deep inside he felt disconnected to his body. When he put on his mother's clothes for the first time, he finally felt like himself.
I didn't know why I was fascinated by either my sister or my mom's closet, you know? And I remember going in there fascinated by all of that stuff. And
at what age?
Just getting some clothes. My hair was short because we're talking the 50s, yep. Late 50s. So I put a scarf over my head, threw on a little lipstick, got in one of my mom's outfits or whatever it was, and actually went out of the house and walked around. We lived in an apartment complex, walked around the apartment complex. And little did I know that would be a pattern that I would do all the way until I was like 65 years old. And I didn't know why I felt so comfortable in doing that. That it felt like me, but it was also the great taboo. I couldn't tell anybody, you know? And so, that kind of set up the pattern.
Over the next years, Bruce struggled with his identity, but found comfort in sports as they became a distraction. The one thing that he was good at. His physical abilities would be his saving grace and open up a world of opportunities for him in the years to come. Once he graduated from college, he and Christy wed in 1972 and settled into a small, modest apartment where they began planning for their future. Up until that point, Christy had no idea about Bruce's gender issues, but that would change a year later. Quote, I told Christy in 1973 about my gender issues. It wasn't by choice. She was putting clothes away and noticed a rubber band on one of the hooks of her bra. When she asked me about it, my first response was non-committal. I don't know. It was not very convincing.
So what was the first conversation you had with anybody about it?
Probably my first ex-wife, had a few of those. My first ex-wife, after we had been married for a while, I told her I had some issues here, and these are the things that are going through my head.
And that was the first time you'd spoken to anybody?
Yes, first time. Couldn't speak to my sister, my family, nothing.
Your sister Pam, I think we've just seen a picture of you with Pam, and you're very close. And
yes, my sister Pam, we've been very close and continue to stay very close.
Upon being confronted, Bruce would admit that he had been secretly wearing Christy's clothes. Her reaction? She was shocked. Quote, she was totally shocked. She didn't know anyone who cross-dressed and had very little understanding of the whole thing. I tried to pass it off as just a phase, a fantasy that some men have. She was overwhelmed with compassion and gratitude that I trusted her enough to tell her. She processed it as simply a piece of information. And then it was time for me to go back to being a guy.
I can't remember the exact words because it was such a shock to me. He told me he always wanted to be a woman. And understandably, I was speechless.
The incongruity of that revelation couldn't help but confound her then.
It's so hard to wrap your head around it, particularly because he was such a manly man. But it didn't threaten me. It didn't threaten our marriage.
Jenner sharing with ABC's Diane Sawyer memories of a disclosure to Christie that Jenner acknowledges was far from a complete one.
In 2015, Christie was interviewed by Vanity Fair. In that interview, she elaborated on their relationship and struggles, saying, "He told me he always wanted to be a woman. He told me as a little kid how that felt. He told me of different fantasies that he had related to loving women. If he had been wanting to dress up when he was with me, or any of those things, it would have been different. But he was still so masculine. He was still my hero. He was still pursuing this goal of being the greatest athlete in the world. It wasn't like it was a hard thing to handle. It was like a piece of information he shared with me, and then he went back to being a real guy. He had a strong, healthy sex drive and seemed like pure man."
I just knew that I was different, and I found sports. And that's a place where I could, what I call hide, or it could be my distraction. And I was good at it. I could take a guy who I knew, in some cases, a good student, good reader, all those types of things, didn't have any gender issues, go out there on the football field and clean his clock. Yeah, and that was important. And there was at Newtown High School in Newtown, Connecticut. And so it was a way for me to cope with myself, to prove my masculinity, never knowing how far I would go with it, went a long way with it.
After Bruce revealed this information to Christie, the couple swept it under the rug and moved on with their lives. They would relocate to San Jose, where Bruce began to train 8 hours a day for the Olympics. That training would pay off when he crossed the finish line during the last event of the decathlon to take home the gold medal at the 1976 Summer Olympics in Montreal. When he won, Bruce was on a high, but upon waking up the following morning, standing naked in the mirror, that high would come crashing down as he looked in the mirror and hated what he saw. It's the morning after my Olympic win. I am naked with the gold medal around my neck. Now that it's over, who am I? My wife Christy is sleeping in the next room. She thinks she knows me almost 4 years into our marriage. She does know me. She doesn't know me at all. My fingers feel like talons. My shoulders and arms humped and ridged with bony muscles. My hair. I hate my hair, no matter how long I try to make it. I don't like what I see when I dress up. Big arms, legs long but too muscular, no clothes that really fit. It is all great for the decathlon, but not very good for a night out on the town. But the last thing I can do is physically alter my appearance in any way. The sports writers won't tolerate it. America won't tolerate it. I will continue to play the game of Bruce.
But I remember the day after the games, I was in a hotel room in Montreal and didn't have a stitch of clothes on. I got the medal on the bathroom counter and I put the medal on. I look in the mirror and I go, oh my God, what have I just done? Because as I looked in the mirror, I knew that wasn't me. But did I build this character up so big, so masculine, that I'm stuck with him for the rest of my life? And it was kind of scary.
So did you feel you were trapping yourself more and more?
In a lot of ways, I was. I made that character so big.
Upon his victory, Bruce was dubbed America's hero. To him, it was a farce, a big fat lie, a lie that he would keep up for decades. 2 years after his victory, Bruce and Christy welcomed their first child, a son, who they named Bert after Bruce's late brother who died in a car accident years prior. Though the couple were once considered America's sweethearts, they were now at odds, and no child could make it better. Christy thinks I am remote and frustrated, which I am. I find her snappish and angry over things that seem to me incidental. I feel hurt, and she feels hurt. I sometimes worry that so much of my life is in the public eye, now that there is nothing left of me in private. My gender issues are there. Gender issues are always there. Fed up with the mounting issues, Christy decides to leave Bruce, taking the baby, their belongings, and moves in with her mother. After being separated for several months, Bruce decides to put himself back out there and goes to the Playboy Mansion for an event. There, he runs into Linda Thompson, the beautiful ex-girlfriend of Elvis Presley. On May 1st, 1979, I am at the Playboy Mansion for a charity tennis tournament. I win the tournament. A woman named Linda Thompson gives out the winning trophy and a shirt. At the time, she is 28 years old and has a role on the television show Hee Haw, although her real claim to fame is having been Elvis Presley's girlfriend for 4 years.
When I met Bruce, the most impossibly masculine man I had ever met, world's greatest athlete, down to earth, unstudied. I mean, he was the typical jock, flip-flops, board shorts, a wetsuit when he could, get in the water. I mean, he was always running, jumping, doing, flying, He was just an amazing man, and the most even when I was with Elvis, I write about this in the book too. When I was with Elvis, we're watching the Olympics, and we watched this American decathlete just dominate the decathlon. And we were pulling for him, and when Bruce crossed the finish line, we're watching and cheering, and Elvis says, "Man, that's a good-looking guy. I'm not gay, but damn, he's good-looking, isn't he?" So, Bruce was, again, just physically, and again, an irony of life, the physically gorgeous specimen of a man, but that's not what he thought of for himself. He really identified as a woman, unbeknownst to me.
When Linda and Bruce met, they hit it off and began seeing each other regularly. When Christy found out, she told Bruce that she wanted to reconcile and work on their marriage. They have a child together and feel it important to give their family another shot. When me and Christy get back together, I am 29. We are both committed. I convince myself I can suppress my gender issues for good. I can cross-dress every now and then. I'll be fine. I can manage. I can even be happy. Christy already knows I like to wear her bras. Bruce and Christy reunited for about 3 months, but then split again. This time for good. Upon their split, Bruce gets back together with Linda. Not long after Bruce and Linda reunite, Christy calls with some unexpected news. She's pregnant. The news stuns me. It is not something we ever discussed. I suggest to her that, given we are headed for divorce, she doesn't have to give birth and can terminate the pregnancy. Christy becomes livid. She makes it clear that the child is hers, not ours, and wants me to have nothing to do with raising the child. I bring up the issues of financial responsibility and ask why I should help support a child when the mother has told me to stay away. Despite Bruce's opposition, Christy went through with the pregnancy and gave birth to their daughter on June 10, 1980. Bruce was on the road at the time and not present for the birth. A few short months later, his then-girlfriend Linda made an announcement. She was pregnant. This news was shocking to Bruce, who was going through a very difficult divorce at the time. Not wanting to have a child out of wedlock, Bruce insisted that he and Linda get married. They wed on January 5, 1981, a few short months after his divorce from Christy was finalized.
Oh my God. Yeah, is he gay?
Yes. Are you gay?
No, I'm not gay. I am not gay. I am, as far as I know, heterosexual.
You don't know.
Because it's not, as far
as you know.
As far as I know, I've never been with a guy. I've always been married, raising kids.
Right, and you can desire a woman every bit as much.
Yeah.
He's almost amused by my attempt to walk through this maze.
Again, it's the confusion inside this because...
So much confusing.
Yes. If you are assigned male and you become female, but you like women, are you a lesbian? Are you a heterosexual who...
You're going back to the sex thing, and it's apples and oranges. There's two different things here. Sexuality is who you are personally attracted to, who you turns you on, male or female. But gender identity is how to do with who you are as a person and your soul and who you identify with inside.
Were you fair to these women you married?
No, I wasn't as fair as I should have been.
Yes, but do you look back and say, I apologize for that?
When Bruce married Linda, he had a very deep secret. Unlike how he shared his gender issues with his ex-wife Christy, Bruce kept this information to himself and kept Linda in the dark. Quote, although I did not know what the term meant at that time in the early 80s, it was clear that I had gender dysphoria. It is unconscionable that I did not mention any of my issues to Linda before we got married. The failure was not malicious. There was the fear that if I had mentioned my struggles, any woman thinking of marrying me would have just run. I wanted domesticity. I wanted a family. I wanted full-time companionship. Just as I also thought that by having these things, I would exercise what was living inside me. Bruce's decision to withhold this information would be a decision that he would later regret. At this time, Bruce's personal life was a mess, and his career was on a downward spiral. The media began labeling Bruce as a playboy who abandoned his first wife and children and was a deadbeat father. With the scrutiny of the press, his non-existent relationship with his children, and his gender issues, his marriage to Linda imploded very quickly. Quote, at that point, even though we have two adorable little boys, the relationship between Linda and I is fraught with tension. I am not only frustrated with the relationship, but also frustrated with myself, depressed, and ashamed of the mess I have made. One marriage is over, another one is going downhill. I'm trying to participate in the raising of 4 children under the age of 8 and not doing a very good job of it. We bicker. I am moody. I seek every opportunity I can to cross-dress. It is a temporary fix, like it always is. You feel a rush of adrenaline, and then you feel as sad and deflated as ever. Play acting when you don't want to play and you don't want to act anymore. But something is still better than nothing.
But it was never me. It was never, well, who's in my soul? And then it becomes, how do you deal with it? And I dealt with the best I can by just sneaking around, it's like I was living 2 lives. Like in my book, I talk about, I used to love to get Vegas speaking engagements. Why? Because I could get out of the house, go into a parking lot, cross-dress, hop in the car, make sure I could make it all the way. With fuel, I could just about make it the whole way with gas, so I didn't have to stop at a gas station and just drive to Vegas, like Caitlyn could drive to Vegas.
So you dress up as a woman and drive there?
What's that?
You would dress up in women's clothing and drive to Vegas?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I did a lot of crazy things. Walk around hotels, do this and that. Fortunately, never got caught.
Fed up with living a double life, Bruce decided to confide in Linda and share with her his struggles. When Bruce revealed his deepest secret, Linda was in denial and couldn't come to terms with it. To help mediate the situation, they go see a therapist. Quote, Linda grapples with the concept of gender dysphoria. She wonders if it is temporary, something that goes away. The therapist is emphatic. Never. It is only a matter of how you deal with it. Linda and I struggle on.
Mm-hmm. Now, am I correct that you married Bruce in 81 and he first told you that he identified as a woman in 85?
In 85, my son Brody was about 18 months old, and Brandon was about 3.5 years old. And again, this impossibly masculine, hairy, muscular man came to me one day and said, I need to tell you something about myself. And I really thought he was going to tell me that he had an affair.
Yeah,
He was on the road a lot. And that would have been the good news.
Yeah, right.
Past that, maybe. But he said, I identify as a woman. And I said, what are you talking about, you identify as a woman? He said, I am a woman trapped in a man's body. I said, no, honey, we need to go to therapy. That was my knee-jerk response. I got to get this man into therapy. Something's gone awry here.
Bruce and Linda would attend therapy for months with the hope that they can salvage their marriage. In an attempt to make one last-ditch effort, Bruce invited Linda to New York for a weekend getaway. Quote, we both know our marriage is almost certainly over, but I tell her to meet me in New York, where I am making an appearance. She knocks on the door of the hotel room where I am staying. I open it. I am in a dress and wig and makeup. Linda says nothing. I will never forget that look of shock and hurt on her face. I have hurt her, and she does not deserve it. I run into the bathroom and immediately change. I walk back out. I am so sorry. I mean the words, but I know they mean nothing. Linda is silent, and I am not sure what I was thinking then, and I am not entirely sure 30 years later. I know I was terribly frustrated and irritable. Maybe I was blaming Linda for not letting me live my life, when in fact I had never told her about my life until we had been married for several years. Maybe I wanted the marriage to end, and this was the surefire way to do it. Or maybe, after telling Linda, I felt compelled that she now actually meet the woman inside me.
I guess in some ways you met Caitlyn on a trip to New York.
Yes, I was trying to understand this thing called transgender. And when Bruce said, come to New York and be with your husband, husband was the word I was looking for. So I went to New York, knocked on the door, fully anticipatory that we would have a lovely romantic weekend.
In that 80s encounter, Linda was unprepared for who she says she saw, Caitlyn.
I just crumbled. I think I even fell down in the hall. I just went, oh, no, and I just started crying. And she said, I'm so sorry. I just thought it was very important that you see who I authentically am. And not until that moment, I guess, did it sink into my psyche.
Linda was also interviewed by Vanity Fair in 2015 for Caitlyn's coming out story. In that interview, she goes over the demise of her marriage to Bruce and what transpired from her perspective. Quote, when we went to therapy, the therapist said, you can live with him as he transitions, and you can have what you might consider a lesbian relationship because, you can stay married to him. You will both be women, but he's attracted to you. He would like to stay married to you. Or if that doesn't appeal to you, you can move on. And I opted for the latter because I married a man. As much as I felt my life and my dream were destroyed, and I was going to have to get a divorce, and then my kids, I was going to have to one day explain to them, I thought my pain doesn't compare to the pain that he's in. At least I'm comfortable living in my own body.
But she, after a few sessions, told me, this is who Bruce is. This is not ever, ever, ever going to go away. And 25% of transgender people commit suicide. My heart has always gone out to Bruce. I was devastated when Bruce came to me and told me the news. I was very, very happily married to Bruce Jenner. He was a great guy and a good dad and a great husband. He was faithful. I was just really, really happily married. I thought I had found my normal after having made the decision to leave Elvis to seek normal in my life. And so I was absolutely devastated. But as hurt as I was, and, as much as my world around me crumbled, my greater empathy and compassion had to go out to Bruce because at least I was comfortable in my own skin being a woman. And I just thought, what a horrible lot in life to feel that disconnected, that disenfranchised.
Did any part of you, Linda, ever feel like I'm going to stay in this marriage? I got married, and if he needs to dress up at home or whatever we have to do to make this work, we'll make this marriage work? Or was that just like, no way?
No. Call me a terrible person, but
no, not at all. I wouldn't either.
You married a man.
You married a guy. Yeah, no one can blame you for that.
I did not. Yeah, I've never been sexually attracted to women. I love my girlfriends, and appreciate their beauty and all that, but I had never been sexually attracted to a woman. And I was young. I was 35 years old. I wanted a normal relationship. And I just couldn't see myself growing old, with someone that, was my same sex. And again, he was transitioning, he had gone through 5 years.
Bruce and Linda separated in 1986. Upon their separation, Bruce moved into a tiny apartment in Malibu and began the transition process. He received electrolysis for hair removal on his face, neck, and chest, had feminizing surgery to his face, and began taking female hormones. Bruce called this period the dark years, as he spent much of his time alone. Though it was very isolating, Bruce was determined to transition and live his authentic life. It was his goal to transition before he turned 40 in 1989. As Bruce began transitioning, his appearance changed, and the public and press began to notice. One of the most drastic changes to his appearance was the development of breasts due to the hormones he was on. As the tabloids began running endless reports that he's a crossdresser, Bruce made the difficult decision to not proceed with the final transition.
Once I decided, okay, I'm going through this, first person I called, which I talk about in the book, is Alan Nierab, who was my PR guy back in the 80s. He was kind of just beginning at Rogers and Cowan. The New York Times was going to write an article that I was a crossdresser because the 80s by far were the most difficult times for me. I thought I was going to transition before I was 40, before 1990, I'm doing this. And, so I was on hormones for 4.5 years. I'm in therapy. I'm getting electrolysis done. I'm doing all these things. Obviously, your look changes, and the rumor mill started. Right. And so the New York Times is going to write an article that I was a crossdresser, which is not the case. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm being honest. It's not the case. I'm trans. Okay. I'm not a crossdresser. So I called my lawyer in, my manager at the time, and Alan, and I sat him down and I told him my story, and you got to stop it, and Alan stopped it.
Though Bruce wanted to finally live in truth and planned on transitioning before he turned 40, those plans would come to an unexpected halt. He took a look at the social climate and realized that it was not the right time. Quote, "What about my 4 kids, who range in age from 6 to 11? How would they possibly handle my transition given the air? How comfortable would my first 2 wives be with me seeing the kids? It would be traumatizing for any child to try to understand that their dad is now a woman." Bruce still has earning potential. Bruce pays the bills. Bruce is tired of being lonely and isolated and wonders if, as a trans woman, she would be even more lonely and isolated. So I stopped. I stopped going through the transition in 1989. I can't do this to my kids. I can't do this to me. I can't do this to society. It is not ready. I have to get back in the game. I have to once again establish Bruce as the dominant presence, no matter how much I loathe him. In order to get back into the game and to quiet the rumors, Bruce concluded that it's time to start dating again. That's when he meets Kris Kardashian. It's 1990, and Bruce is in Alaska fishing with Candace and Steve Garvey, who happen to be mutual friends of Kris. Steve and Candace set Bruce and Kris up on a blind date. The foursome go to the Ivy for dinner, where they hit it off. Quote, "Kris knows everybody, and everybody knows her. They are much more happy to see her than me. I have never met anyone this social. Right before we leave, Kris applies pencil outliner on her lips. She doesn't even use a mirror. She goes zip, zip, zip. It's perfect. Now, I actually know something about using pencil outliner, and it's very hard to do without a mirror. Now I'm hooked. A year ago, 6 months ago, that simple act would have heightened my gender issues. I would have felt envy that she can simply do this whenever she wants, wherever she wants. She's everything I am not. I am not confident. I am not comfortable in my own skin. I am not social. She is natural and disarming about it all. I fall in love with Kris quickly. She falls in love with me quickly. We marry after a courtship of 7 months."
So, and then he met Kris Kardashian and came to me one day again and said, I want to talk to you. I thought, uh-oh, what now?
Yeah.
And he said, I want to get married. And I was thrilled because I thought, oh, good, my sons will still have this, visual of a masculine father. I won't have to explain anything to them, and I thought that it would kind of steady his life and help Bruce, to sort of stabilize where he was in his life. I didn't know then, in my ignorance kind of about being transgender, that it would further kind of imprison him, that he had to live in this male body for many more years.
Bruce and Linda's divorce was finalized in 1991. A few months later, he married Kris. Once married, Kris became Bruce's manager and immediately began rebuilding his credibility, career, and brand by firing his whole team, who he had since the start of his career. Unlike how Linda was left in the dark about Bruce's gender issues, Kris allegedly was made aware of them prior to marrying him. Quote, I tell Kris about my gender issues before I make love to her. I don't want to repeat the unfairness of what I did to Linda. I don't tell her the full extent, but I tell her a great deal. She insists that she was taken by surprise by my ultimate transition to Caitlyn, which means that, in her mind, she did not know enough. All I know is what I know. I told her there had been a woman inside me all my life. I told her I dressed as a woman, and she knew. She knew because I did it in front of her several times after we were married. I elaborated on the electrolysis to remove the hair from my face and chest, which was also pretty self-evident. I also told her I had been in hormone therapy for roughly the past 4.5 years before stopping 6 months earlier. It was obvious that the effect of the hormones had caused something, 2 somethings to be exact. To me, they were the development of breast, size 32B. To Kris, they were man boobs, caused by my being out of shape. I was out of shape, but not out of shape enough in my mind to cause size 32B man boobs. In my mind, she must have known what they were. So the idea that she was later shocked by my transition is equally shocking to me. It implies that I left her in the dark about the severity of my struggles. Maybe she thought that whatever gender issues I had, she could change me. I did tell Kris I was gender dysphoric.
Do you think he told Kris in those early days what was going on with him, or did he do the same thing to her that he did to you, which was not say anything?
Bruce had like 36B breast when they got married.
Really?
My sons were 4 and 6, and they saw their dad get out of the shower one day, and they said, "Mommy, Daddy has boobs." It would be impossible to hide. I mean, there was so much speculation too back then about what happened to Bruce Jenner. You know, he did some surgery on his nose, and he looks more feminine.
Yeah, were you surprised that it just flat out didn't come out that, hey, this guy's transgender?
It's shocking.
Again, he was transitioning. You know, he had gone through 5 years of transitioning. And you asked about Kris earlier. Her daughter, Kendall, did an interview for Vogue magazine in September and said that her mother knew from the 3rd date.
Really?
So I wouldn't be the one to say whether she knew or not. That's a question more for Kris, but her daughter, Kendall, did say that she had known since the 3rd date.
Despite these claims, Kris has been adamant over the years that she did not know the severity of Bruce's gender issues. In 2015, she told Vanity Fair magazine the following. When I met Bruce, he told me that he had done hormones back in the early 80s. This was a conversation that took place in the early 90s. So what he was telling me happened a decade earlier, and he never really explained it. There wasn't a gender issue. Nobody mentioned a gender issue. Somebody mentioned that he at one point in his life liked to dress up. According to Caitlyn, when this information was disclosed to Kris accepted the situation and began cultivating their lives together and blended family. In the beginning, Caitlyn says all was well. Quote, with Kris, it is different. It is different because, unlike with Linda, who I never told a single thing until we had been married for several years, I talked to Kris about my issues very early in our relationship. She knows there is something inside me that must have a place to go. Kris and I talk. She is willing to see what it feels like. So for the first time, I dress up in front of her. She seems comfortable. I get the feeling that Kris is willing to let me cross-dress on certain occasions. She has no real interest. She married Bruce. It is Bruce whose career she is trying to resuscitate. She had defended Bruce to her friends who had heard the rumors. Eventually, Kris and I do reach an understanding. Take Caitlyn on the road, but she is not to play in our home or hometown. End of discussion. This compromise satisfied Bruce as they agreed that he could explore other parts of himself just as long as he didn't do it at home. According to Kris, this is completely false. She told Vanity Fair the following. He never cross-dressed in front of me. A few times I would see a suitcase or things lying around the house. I never set down any rules.
Write in the book that seeing Kris Jenner's tears on Keeping Up with the Kardashian about your transition puzzled you then, and it puzzles you now. Why? Is it because you
Well,
felt
she knew. No,
all
she knew.
along?
Oh, of course she knew all the time. I had been on hormones for 4.5 years leading up to that point when I met her. Yeah, it was very noticeable. But I was honest. Did I downplay it? I'm sure I did, but I was honest with her because I had just gone through 6 years of hell and I wanted to get back into life.
In the beginning, Kris seemed accepting of Bruce's secret lifestyle and his children from his previous marriages. In Bruce's eyes, there were many perks to having Kris as a wife. And one of those perks was that Bruce thought that she could help him reestablish his relationship with his children. And according to Bruce, she did, at least in the beginning. But around the mid-90s, things would begin to change. Linda unexpectedly filed for support payments, which caused a rift in the relationship and blended family dynamics. Quote, Kris is upset, very upset, that her efforts to be a good stepmom are not appreciated. She is no longer inclined to make the effort. When asked many years later, the Jenner kids have a different viewpoint. Kris did not want them around anymore once we had our own children. I begin to see less and less of the Jenner children. As the years go by, I barely see them at all. My parental efforts are concentrated entirely on raising the Kardashian children, and then Kendall and Kylie. I miss birthdays with the Jenner kids, I miss graduations, I miss weddings.
It's come nice and dressed up for the beach.
That struggle would take its toll on others, too. Viewers of this November 2013 Keeping Up with the Kardashians episode remember seeing son Brody Jenner confronting his father on camera.
You weren't around. I was a kid, and it's like, now's not the time to talk about it.
Jenner admitting that the depression and isolation of that gender identity crisis
Good smile.
led to the former Olympian being absent too often.
You weren't there a lot.
Yes. The big formative years for them, I was really struggling with these issues. I talked to all the boys about this after the fact that, I didn't do a good job. And I apologized to my kids for that.
Bruce's marriage to Kris not only affected his relationship with his children, but it also affected his relationship with his older sister Pam and mother. Quote, when Kris threw a party to celebrate the 20th anniversary of my Olympic win, Pam was not invited. Neither was my mother. Pam was devastated. Kris did not want my sister there. A reaffirmation that the only family that should matter to me now was her family. And I went along with the decision. It created a terrible rupture between Pam and me. We rarely spoke for almost 20 years. In 2007, Kris Jenner landed a deal with the E! Network for a reality show that we all now know to be Keeping Up with the Kardashians. When the show aired, it became an instant hit, thrusting the whole family into the spotlight. With the success came some backlash when Bruce's family denounced the show and him. They thought he was becoming too Hollywood and no longer recognized the person he was now becoming.
So let's talk Kardashian for a bit. In 2008,
Oh, why not?
In 2008, your Aunt Ellie sent you a letter that read, in part, "What a disappointment you are to your public, Bruce. I haven't heard one complimentary thing from anyone yet. The consensus is that you look like a milky toast and henpecked husband and stepfather. You do look very uncomfortable in every scene you are in."
I was always around very strong women. And Kris certainly is a very strong woman. And I'm not saying that in a negative sense. I like strong women. She's a very good businesswoman, very strong. I learned a lot from Kris. But I didn't mind. I never in my life, because of who I was, felt like I was worthy or that my opinion was worthy. So I always kind of stayed in the background when it came to strong people, because I've got all these secrets. I got all these things inside. So I don't have confidence in myself to put my voice forward. And I had no problem playing that milky toast little one in the background.
Bruce felt like he had sold himself out. He felt weak and inferior, no self-respect. The more successful the show became, the more confident, controlling Kris became. She was sitting at the top of a multi-million-dollar empire, And according to Bruce, this was the beginning of the end. Quote, I believe that the more successful the show becomes, the less she needs me. I am not the primary breadwinner anymore. I feel increasingly irrelevant. I receive a healthy paycheck from the show, but I never see one dime of it. It all goes right to Kris. I do not have a checking account. I have a credit card, but purchases are carefully poured over. It becomes increasingly difficult for me to not make any financial decisions on my own. Actually, I can't make any.
I think what she doesn't realize when it says you got all the checks, yeah, it was a household. She never paid a bill from 1972. So you were in charge of that.
Didn't know how much a gardener was. And in the book writes, well, Kris didn't need me anymore. All the checks for keeping up with the Kardashians, they all went to Kris. Went to Kris? How about it went to the mortgage and the insurance and education? You start talking about how I was hoarding money?
By the late 2000s, Bruce's gender issues began rising and intensifying. His marriage to Kris takes a nosedive, and though they have been married for more than 20 years, the last 5 go up in flames. Quote, the first 15 or so were good and sometimes great, but the last 5 have been terrible. We are at each other's throats. She is frustrated with me all the time. I am worn down. She yells and then I yell back, because I always feel on the defensive. She resents that I never want to leave the house unless it means a hotel. I don't feel like I'm living anymore. I need control of my life back. I need control of my finances so I can spend money the way I want to. I want to see my first 4 children without friction and the fear that it might upset Kris. I am tired of my life consisting of secret items tucked away in a tiny closet with a lock and key. I cannot go on like this.
I always kind of stayed in the background and never really expressed my opinion on things because I was around a lot of very powerful women, and it was just easier to keep your mouth shut. Okay, and move on and to the next thing. The book was the first time I had an opportunity to talk and to tell kind of not so much my side of the story, but how I felt about a lot of things. And it was extraordinarily honest, the book. I was extraordinarily nice to Kris. I say in the book how she saved my life. Right. I mean, I was going down, back in the 80s when we met, I was just struggling. I was all sorts of issues on identity and all that kind of stuff. And she literally saved my life. We met each other and
it's interesting you describe it as a partnership, As a partnership.
Yeah, it was a big-time partnership, but she led
She saw I could help you, and you were there to help her do her thing, become who she is.
And she was a Beverly Hills housewife when I met her.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all she was.
Not the businesswoman she is now.
No. And but she grew. She was very good at that.
Yeah.
And she grew, and we both grew together, and brought my career back, brought my credibility back. She did a lot of great things for me.
Yeah. And Kim is starting to use harsh words, though.
We don't even go in there.
No.
I love Kim. She's a great kid. Yeah, that kind of hurts.
In 2013, Kris and Bruce decided to split. In December of that year, he scheduled a secret consultation to have his Adam's apple shaved to reduce its size. This was a secret. No one was to know, except Bruce and his assistant. But not even 24 hours later, he gets a call. I am in my car when the phone rings. It's Harvey Levin of TMZ, the notorious gossip channel and website. Harvey said, "We heard you went in to have a consultation for a tracheal shave. I have been told that's the beginning steps of transition. It's a huge story. I confirm that I am thinking of having the procedure done, which will be used by TMZ to suggest that I am in the beginning stages of transitioning into a woman. I plead, Harvey, don't do this to me." He says, "This is a huge story." I beg, "Harvey, please don't do this to me. I haven't even spoken to all my children yet about this. By printing this stuff, you destroy lives." I can tell he couldn't care less about my pleas. He's going to print the story on their website, which will then go out all over the world with the all but certain implication I am becoming a woman.
They've been saying that since 1976. That's not my experience with Bruce. He's a great guy. I love him. I don't know what he's going through right now, but I think he's just very happy. And I think every time he makes a change in his life, whether it's emotional or physical or, whatever he's doing, somebody's going to comment on whatever look you have going on for the day. Mm-hmm. And, people often ask me, what's going on with just his hair alone. That's where they're getting part of it. And I say, look, I love to control everything I can because I'm a control freak, but I had to let that one go. I can't.
Bruce's changing appearance becomes media fodder. Despite the backlash, he goes through with the procedure and has his Adam's apple shaved in January 2014. After his surgery, he is photographed with a bandage on his neck, and this picture confirms what the tabloids have printed about him for decades. Bruce Jenner is transitioning to a woman. The story is all over the press, the internet, and spreads like wildfire. Left with no other choice but to tell his family, Bruce meets with his children one by one and breaks the news. He starts with the Jenner children, who, to his surprise, are not shocked, as there have been signs of this for decades.
Was it like you, looking back, could you have known, perhaps?
Oh, yeah.
Unconsciously. Were there the signs? Telltale
there were signs. Yeah. And I knew that there was something up. I never really wanted to, label it or kind of hone it down into something. It didn't really matter to me, and it still doesn't. My dad's still my dad. And
what signs could that be?
I have memories when I was young. I don't want to embarrass her, but I have memories when I was young of her getting surgery, her really going through she went through a lot of surgery and hormone therapy and all that stuff in the 80s when I was young. And so began the process and then felt like the world wasn't ready and backed out and said, oh, okay, this isn't making me any happier. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. It just didn't seem like a very bright future for her in that moment. I don't want to speak for her, but we've talked about it. For her in that moment, going back to being Bruce and a man seemed like that might have been the easier path. So in that transitional time back then, I remember seeing things that were different. And I had signs and I had ideas that not that my dad was transgender, but that my dad had some kind of physical insecurities that I didn't really care to explore deeper,
Upon talking to the Jenner kids, Bruce makes his rounds to inform the Kardashians. Some of them are shocked, others not so much. Quote, Kim basically already knows and is totally supportive. So is Kourtney. Khloe has the hardest time with it. She is upset because I never specifically told her I was going to transition. Kendall and Kylie are 19 and 17. Unlike how the Jenner kids reacted to Bruce's truth, the Kardashians have a different reaction. Most of them express feelings of betrayal, hurt, and anger.
Betrayed because more business people, we believed whatever, I'm talking about Bruce now, so we believed whatever Bruce said.
Right.
And we kept, again, where there's smoke, there's fire. All these tabloids are coming out, things, rumors, and we're like, okay, we asked the source. It's our dad. We could ask you. No, that's not true. And I understand it's difficult to come clean. Something happened where we were at a meeting with E! For something, and they mentioned that Bruce was having a TV show about transitioning or something. What the f***? We've been asking you, and why do business people know? I never want someone to feel like they have one up on our family. We are a family.
Bruce Jenner is
a
woman.
Yeah.
In her book, Caitlyn writes that after she informed her family of her decision to fully transition to a woman, she and her team booked the Diane Sawyer interview, where she would reveal to the world who she really was. When this interview came out, the public was shocked. Bruce Jenner, the former Olympic gold medalist, America's hero and golden boy, the athletic patriarch of the Kardashian-Jenner empire, identifies as a woman. This information was shocking. But what would be even more shocking was when the world would meet Caitlyn Jenner for the first time. Caitlyn would make her debut in the 2015 Vanity Fair interview. The Diane Sawyer interview said goodbye to Bruce, and the Vanity Fair interview said hello to Caitlyn. In that interview, for the first time, Caitlyn made public claims that Kris knew all along that she identified as a woman, and these claims set Kris off. On their show, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, Kris appeared distraught over Bruce's transition as she grieved the loss. In 2017, Caitlyn released her memoir, The Secrets of My Life, which detailed her life's journey from Bruce to Caitlyn. In her book, she writes in detail all the trials and tribulations she endured to finally reach a place of peace. But she also, in Kris's eyes, threw her under the bus as she continued to push the narrative that Kris knew. These claims would create a feud that divided the family.
I think her concerns with the book are legitimate. I mean, her feelings are legitimate.
She says the book is all made up, that you're a person who doesn't give a shit, that she's done. She's never been so angry and disappointed in somebody. Do you think that she believes what you've written is untrue?
Let me ask you this question.
Yes.
Was I hard on her in the book? This is your honest opinion.
Well, you blame her for your estrangement and abandonment of your kids. You say she was controlling. You say that you played into her. She was the boss. So I mean, there are harsh truths in the book that you say,
but these are all
they're your truths.
They're my truths.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why last week when she came up with that whole statement that you just read, that really ticked me off because that separates me from my children.
So if she says she is done with you, where do you go from here? Did you call her up? Will you speak? What's the next step?
Well, she called me up and said she never wanted to talk to me again, so I haven't called her back. My book is honest and it's my story. Okay. And I'm sorry she feels that way. And I just don't want her to alienate me from my children.
Well, so where does that leave you with the Jenner girls and with Kim and Khloe and Kourtney?
I don't know. We'll see how that goes off in the future.
Since the release of Caitlyn's book, she and the Kardashians have had an up and down relationship. In recent interviews, she's revealed that they are no longer as close as they once were and expresses much regret about their damaged relationship. She's recently spoken out to explain where she stands with them today.
The only one that was really, and I still even to today can't quite figure it out, was Khloe. Khloe, for some reason, was pissed off about something through this whole process. Honestly, it's been 5-6 years, and I really haven't talked to her since.
Caitlyn, do you think she's more thinking about herself? She's not thinking about you?
I don't know. I don't know what it is, and that's all I can say.
Well, why would she?
So we never, and Khloe and I were really close. I raised Khloe since she was 5 years old.
Mm.
I don't know what her issues are. I really don't know.
Though they spent over 20 years together and created one of the most iconic families in pop culture, this wasn't enough. In closing out her book, Caitlyn writes, "Now the view from the looking glass is different. I see who I am who I know who I am. I am Caitlyn. Caitlyn Marie Jenner."